Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and currently of Sports Info Solutions, joined today by Corey March, also from SIS. He runs the business development here. That means all the baseball teams that we work with, all the football teams that we work with, all of our clients in the different realms that we work with. Really, wherever you go, Corey is running the business of the business side of things here. And he's also one of our foremost fantasy experts. Don't tell his wife, but he has gambled on sports before, but that'll never happen again, of course. He's sworn that off these days. But he is still a fantasy expert. And we brought him on today because we got a lot of good feedback about having John Veros on. A lot of the fantasy people out there loved hearing about some of the injury expertise. A lot of the non-fantasy people did too. But Corey wanted to dive in today on some players, that he's done some research on, talking about some undervalued players that he thinks are going too high, too low in the draft, and then also some of the rookies that are going to be in their first year in the NFL this year, and talking about how he thinks they'll be on their new teams, how they'll fit on their new teams, and hopefully give some insight on how those guys can help you win your leagues. So without further ado, welcome on, Corey.
Wow, heck of an intro. Maybe a little bit too much information there. But yeah, Matt alluded to, I run the business development department here. And if there's ever a situation where I usually like to refer to myself as the resident fantasy analyst. So I think you've got the right guy for the conversation here.
Yeah, and Corey, just to preface everything, you probably lead the country in data hub usage. There's not a day that goes by when I don't see you feverishly working away on the data hub, pulling different spreadsheets out and combining them every which way. So I'm excited to hear what kind of research you put together going into this podcast. You ready to jump in?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. You're right about the data hub usage. Maybe I'll have to write more this year instead of just doing random research that doesn't actually ever see the light of day. Sometimes on the SIS Twitter account, so make sure you follow that.
Yes. Always checking out at sportsinfo_SIS for all the great different fun facts that's out there. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about some of these draft value players. And starting right at the top, as we always do with the quarterbacks, the most important position. Tell me about some of the guys here. What do you think here? Who are the guys that you're looking at that you think might go too high, might go too low, that you think can give some interesting insights?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the quarterback position, it's kind of an annual thing, but a lot of people talk about passing on the early round quarterbacks and focusing on filling your roster with other positions, running back, wide receiver specifically, and then waiting until the later rounds to draft a quarterback. So that would mean passing on guys like Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson and Aaron Rodgers, who are great players. And if you had Patrick Mahomes on your team last year, you probably did very well. But there's a lot of value in the later rounds. And I think that's where you want to set your sights in order to build a strong roster at the positions where there's not as much depth and are more important on a week-to-week basis.
So I like it. You're starting off with the kind of strategic importance, and I think this goes along with a lot of conventional wisdom about this. Try to stay away from the quarterbacks, even when you feel like it's time to get a quarterback. Still stay away a little bit longer, and then who are the guys that you'd want to target when you're executing this strategy?
Yeah, there are a lot of guys. People like to talk about some of the hot names and the new guys in the league and exciting players, but the first guy I'm going to give out is Ben Roethlisberger. So last season, Ben Roethlisberger attempted 675 passes, which is the most ever in our data set going back to 2015. And with the state of the league, I would venture to guess that that's the most attempts ever in a single season. And Big Ben, with all those attempts, ended up as the quarterback 3 in fantasy scoring. So heading into last season, he was drafted as the 14th quarterback off the board on average. This year, where did that number 3 finish get him? He's getting drafted 16th among quarterbacks.
Wow. That's less receivers to work with. People, I'm sure, is a lot of that based on.
I'm sure that's the perception. I mean, Antonio Brown's not there anymore. That would be the immediate the thing you could point your finger at and say, this is what's different than last season. But aside from that, coaching staff, personnel, aside from Antonio Brown, you're looking at the same team. You're looking at the same scheme, the same philosophy. And it's not like Big Ben and Antonio Brown were at peak connection last year. Their rate stats were at an all-time low for the two of them. Juju Smith-Schuster really emerged, and I think he'll see a nice increase in targets even beyond what he had last year. He was already near the top of the leaderboard, but he's really locked in as that wide receiver one, kind of what Antonio Brown was without Juju Smith-Schuster. And I think he can fill that role effectively. And then guys that were kind of on the periphery last year, like James Washington and Vance McDonald, will start to emerge. And they brought in Dante Moncrief, who has shown flashes of brilliance when he's been on the field. He's dealt with some injuries in his career, but in the right system, I could see him really flourishing.
Yep, I was a James Washington fan coming out. It wouldn't surprise me to see him kind of have a big year there. Ryan Switzer also got to take a look at in the slot. He could be somebody making some noise, you think?
Interesting weapon, not necessarily a fantasy target. And that's an interesting tangent to kind of go on, because Matt and I always talk about the difference between on the field raw talent and ability and how it translates to fantasy. And I'll think a player is good or not good, and Matt will have differing opinions because we have different criteria for that type of a measurement. I'm looking at it from more of the fantasy perspective, and Matt's looking at it from the more scouting and evaluation type of a perspective. And Ryan Switzer, he's a nice player with the ball in his hands, but he's just not going to have a lot of opportunity to score fantasy points, I think.
Who else amongst the quarterbacks? I feel like Big Ben, that makes sense. It feels like any of these quarterbacks that are kind of not going to be one of the top quarterbacks drafted, unless you're in a league where 20 quarterbacks are going off the board, there's going to be somebody to get in that kind of ilk.
Right. Your traditional league size is a 12-team league. So that's the cutoff around guys like Cam Newton and Jared Goff being drafted as starters. Just beyond that, Jameis Winston is a guy who's going 13th overall among quarterbacks. And last year, the Bucs threw for the most air yards by more than 500 yards over the rest of the group. That's more than a full air yard per reception over the second highest team. I dug into that further, and it was interesting to see that they're not even throwing your traditional deep balls, which are the 20-plus air yard throws. They were 8th in the league in the amount of deep balls that they threw. But they threw a ton of intermediate passes they were traveling between 10 and 19 yards. So they led the league in those intermediate attempts by 64 over the second highest team in the league. So that gap, that 64 over number 2, was the same gap between number 2, which I think was the Rams, and number 31 in the league.
Wow.
So basically the entire league. So there's a team that's throwing the ball downfield. Those intermediate passes are a lot more manageable to complete. And I think you'll see Jameis, he'll continue to emerge. This might be his first full season, hopefully, that he gets under his belt. And he's got some nice weapons there with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and O.J. Howard.
For my money, I think if he's healthy this year, Jameis Winston, I think he might throw the ball for as many air yards as any quarterback in the league. And I don't pay too much attention to the different fantasy stuff, but I do know the value of air yards, especially in kind of the predictive value when you start to look at those things. Bruce Arians, Jameis Winston, you're going to be throwing the ball down the field. I feel like buy on O.J. Howard, all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. New coaching staff in there. Jameis already wasn't afraid to throw the ball downfield a ton, and now he's just probably going to get more encouragement to do that with the new staff in there, Bruce Arians.
All right. Who else is on your list?
If you're digging deep and you want to wait until the late rounds on quarterbacks, which is a strategy that is completely viable, I would recommend it. I would look to pair maybe Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, who are definitely not your traditional quarterbacks. So after Lamar Jackson got the starting role, in Baltimore last year, he ran the ball. He had the 6th most rushing attempts in the league from that point on. So definitely not what you're used to getting with your quarterbacks in terms of scoring, but he is super effective on the ground. And you add the passing points in there too. He's not a tremendous weapon in the air, but he's definitely a threat. He can score points through the air, even if his primary form of moving the ball is on the ground. I know they brought in, I think it was a coach from Georgia Tech, who we know Georgia Tech runs the triple option in college. So I'll be interested to see if they start implementing a little bit of that. Who knows?
It'd be interesting. So you like those guys, and you'd actually pair them together. You want both those running guys. Is that like because there's an injury risk there? Is it you're just looking for the matchup to see if they're against the team that's more susceptible to run against from that position?
Yeah, I think it's more matchup-based, a more matchup-based philosophy than anything. If you have those two guys on your roster, chances are one of them is going against a defense that they can be successful against. Again, they're not guys who are highly effective through the air. So you want to look out for the right matchup with them. But Josh Allen, the type of guy who is a gunslinger, he'll throw the ball deep downfield and he'll run the ball too. His rate stats on the ground were absolutely ridiculous. He was running the ball in the second half of the year for almost like 8+ yards per carry or something crazy like that. So between the two of them, I know a lot of people like to stream quarterbacks, and that's playing quarterbacks based on matchup. But with this philosophy, if you grab those two guys, you're setting yourself up to stream with two pretty good options and guys who probably bring a pretty high floor in terms of fantasy points on a weekly basis. And if you can get the right matchup from one of them, you'll be in good shape.
Number 1 and number 2 in the NFL in rushing yards last year amongst quarterbacks, and in yards after contact amongst quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson with 364, Josh Allen at 334, and also a nice combined 13 rushing touchdowns between them without even the full season there for Lamar Jackson. I know that's part of what you're looking at from this point of view. All right, anything else that you wanted to talk about from a quarterback perspective?
I think that's it. We'll dive in a little bit later on one of my favorite players, but I don't want to give too much away.
All right, let's move forward and talk about the running backs. Back in the day when I was playing fantasy football, the running backs were way more important than the wide receivers. Now I know running backs don't matter, is what I read on the internet sometimes. What is your take on kind of the positional value, and especially as we talk about a couple of players that you want to bring up?
So running backs definitely do matter in fantasy. I'll keep my opinions to myself on kind of the running backs don't matter debate from a pure football standpoint, but I would agree with the fact that these guys are more interchangeable within an offense. But if a guy has a big role in an offense, you want him on your fantasy team, especially with PPR points becoming more of the norm and these guys catching more balls out of the backfield. Running backs continue to be very important in fantasy.
And that sort of goes back to our, as we talk about, sometimes I like a player skill-wise, you like him better fantasy-wise. Usually the difference there is the opportunity. It's the offense that they're in. It's how many touches they're going to get in that game. And that's why you talk about the interchangeability. So within the fantasy context, who are the guys that you're looking at this year in terms of interesting value plays?
One guy that I love in terms of value is Kerryon Johnson. So he's getting drafted around RB20, which on the surface isn't necessarily too late or too early, kind of middle of the pack in terms of where you're looking to get your starting running backs. But the numbers that we collected on Kerryon are very positive, and if he's healthy this year, I like his chances to pick up where he left off. So an example of that is our total points metric. And for those of you that don't know, total points kind of accounts for a player's contribution on an individual play level. So the amount that Kerryon Johnson contributed on a play is valued accurately in this system. And by that metric, if you're looking at points earned, total points earned per 100 rushes, Kerryon Johnson was first in the league. The Lions have shown to be a team that likes to run the ball. Matt Patricia kind of established that from the get-go when he arrived in Detroit, and they brought in Darrell Bevell this year from Seattle, and we all know their opinion on running the ball. They ran the ball the most in the league last year, to an excruciating amount for some, maybe most people. So we will probably look to see them establish the run even more this year.
Yeah, I mean, he's a big play threat. I think he can make plays in both phases of the game. Interesting player there. So you like him, and what kind of that running back 20 value? You like him a little bit ahead of there?
Yeah, possibly. There are some guys I would probably bump him up ahead of, but he's kind of just, I wouldn't reach too far for him. He's just a guy that if I'm drafting a running back in that range, I'll be thrilled if he ends up on my team. Possibly contributing RB1 value, but definitely comfortable with him as my RB2.
One thing that I kind of don't like about him is I think that team's just going to be in a really tough division this year. I think they're going to have a lot of kind of tough games on their schedule as far as that goes, and they might have just a tough time in general. I like the player actually, but here we go back to the opportunity, and I never know what to make of that. You guys can deal with that over with your fantasy discussion.
Yeah, if they're playing from behind this year, that opens up some more opportunity in the passing game. There's always the question of whether or not a guy is going to contribute in that aspect. So I looked into it, and Kerryon was a factor in the passing game last year for the Lions before he got hurt. I believe he got hurt around week 10, and at that point of the season, he was close to Theo Riddick in terms of targets, but was outproducing him in terms of the rate stats that he put up when he had the ball in his hands.
Interesting. So maybe a little bit more involvement for him there, and it could mean bigger things for him. I like that point. It's true. If they're playing from behind, that could actually be better from a putting up numbers standpoint.
Yeah, if you're getting a point for every catch, then he could rake some of those in. For running backs, it's so easy catching the ball mostly behind the line of scrimmage. They just catch a pass that's dumped off to them, and there's a point right there.
All right, so buy on, carry on. What other running backs do you want to talk about?
One other guy who I can't help but like, he doesn't fit that receiver mold that a lot of the guys who are very successful running back fantasy options do nowadays, but it's Derrick Henry, and he's going as running back 18 right now, kind of in the same group as Kerryon. So interestingly, if you wanted to wait on a running back and maybe in the first round you draft a receiver and then it comes back to you and you pair Derrick Henry and Kerryon Johnson, I think that's a great start to your draft. Derrick Henry came on like dynamite at the end of last year. From weeks 14 to 17, if you took those stats, I know this isn't something that you can realistically do, but if you extrapolated those stats over the course of a season, he would have 348 rushing attempts, 2,340 yards, and 28 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, his stats are just ridiculous. He led the NFL in points earned from a rushing perspective last year. That's total volume as opposed to on a rate basis. The numbers stand out. And actually, we were just joking around in the R&D department the other day, talking about how unsustainable his numbers are, how he's in one sense, we love him because the numbers really shine a light on how much he was responsible for his success when he had it last year and how much value he created. But then also how completely unsustainable it would be over the course of a full season. So not to get too carried away and kind of just balancing both of those things off of each other definitely make it interesting. We had him third in the NFL for running backs with more than 100 carries in terms of yards after contact per attempt, behind Nick Chubb and Austin Eckler. The broken tackle rate at 23.7%. That's fourth in the NFL. And like I mentioned, in points earned, he was right up there at the top. So you got to like what he's been able to do. The question will be sustainability. Certainly they're going to try to go to the well a whole bunch, you'd expect with him. And then the question will just be if that runner, not a receiver bell cow, if that can be functional in 2019.
Whether it's gonna translate over to a new season, it's easy to look at a player's best 4-game stretch and dream big about it and think that these results are the norm, but that's never the case. I'm going to go out and say, but the Titans did win 4 out of their last 5 games and nearly made the playoffs. So there's a good chance they're going to want to continue on with that strategy that almost got them into the playoffs last year, and that was relying heavily on Derrick Henry in the run game.
We'll see, because the 2 years before, in terms of total points, 2016, Derrick Henry ranked 37th in rushing total points. 2017, he ranked 36th. And then 2018, as we said, he went all the way up to number 1. So we do expect some regression there, of course. But a lot of that is going to come down to how much they feed the beast. So it'll be interesting to see. All right, let's move forward and let's go to everybody's new favorite position. Let's talk about those wide receivers. Corey, which are the guys this year that you are looking at in terms of interesting value plays?
Yeah, so you mentioned wide receiver, kind of everyone's new favorite position to gush over, and there's a lot of eye-popping plays that are made throughout the season, and a lot of guys at the top of the class that are just tremendous. Maybe we have the best wide receivers in the league now in terms of league-wide that we've ever had. I don't think that's really a stretch. There's so many good receivers in the league, but here we're talking about value, so I'm going to run off some guys that are a little bit lower on the draft boards, and you can grab a little bit later after you hopefully acquired some of those top-tier guys. The first guy I'm going to mention here is Robbie Anderson. He's being drafted on average about wide receiver 30. So it was an interesting year last year for the Jets, specifically with Sam Darnold getting himself his first NFL experience at quarterback. Before the team's bye, he struggled. He on a points earned per 100 rate, he was averaging minus 2.6, which if it wasn't last in the league, it was damn near close. After the bye, he came out and averaged 7.3 points earned per 100 attempts, which I believe was around middle of the pack and a huge improvement. And something that corresponded with that was that Robbie Anderson started getting twice as many targets as he was prior. Before the bye, he was averaging 13% target share, and after the bye, that number doubled to 26%. And the total number of targets after the Jets bye week, he had the 13th most targets in the league. And as I call myself a casual Jets fan, I pay attention to the Jets more than most teams. Keep an eye around the league, but keep an eye specifically on the Jets. And it was noticeable the chemistry that those two developed as the season went along. And we've got some new coaches in there, but I don't think new coaches will change the fact that these two look comfortable working together.
Yeah, speed kills. Robbie Anderson's got speed. There's no doubt about it. When he's healthy, I think he's been a really effective player. Also looking at the effect of Jamison Crowder that he'll have in there. I think a lot of people think he'll have a big calming effect on a lot of Darnold and just being with somebody with the type of route savvy that Jamison Crowder has, being able to sit in all those soft spots in the zone and also being able to beat that one-on-one man coverage in the slot, gives you a lot of options there. So he can be a real nice safety blanket. So it'll be interesting to see that Jets offense, how they progress. And Le'Veon Bell, of course, being a different weapon there in the whole Adam Gase system. But going back to what you're talking about with Robbie Anderson, with a fast guy like that, I think about some of the fast guys that Gase had in Miami last year who got off to really strong starts early in the year. There were two of the wide receivers that both got injured. They're speedsters, and Gase showed some ability to get those guys open deep. So and get them space in the open field to not just make the deep plays, but also catch the ball and then run after the catch, which I think it'd be interesting to see Robbie Anderson do some more of.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting. I think people would say he fits more of that Kenny Stills mold than the Albert Wilson mold, but who knows? He hasn't had an opportunity to run the ball out of the backfield really. So maybe just get his hands on the ball and get him running with it.
That's interesting. Why do you say I don't necessarily think of him as Kenny Stills or Albert Wilson. I don't know. I don't know if any of these guys. Jakeem Grant also is not a great direct comp for him, but I think of him as a vertical speed guy.
Yeah.
What do you mean from that?
I think where I was going at least is the fact that Kenny Stills is a vertical receiver, and that's really his label. Mm-hmm. Albert Wilson and Jakeem Grant are more. They work in all different parts of the field, including, like I mentioned, carrying out of the backfield. Basically, the types of guys you just kind of get their hands on the ball in space. Kenny Stills strikes me more as a deep threat. It's
always interesting to listen to different people talk about their perceptions of players, because I think I I maybe have a different perception. Kenny Stills has always been a bit of an enigma for me, honestly. Really interesting talent. I think he's got some ability to get in and out of breaks on kind of all levels of the field, but definitely has some effectiveness down there. With Albert Wilson and Jakeem Grant, I definitely think you're right. They did some stuff behind the line of scrimmage. I think it'd be interesting to see Robbie Anderson do some of that stuff. But then, otherwise from that, those guys are going deep every time. Those are just burners.
Yeah, I think the Jets would benefit from just a little bit more creativity on offense, and it's good to know that Adam Gase was bringing that in Miami. I think just the way that we're trending in the league is you want to, different types of things to create efficiency, play action, just creativity in general. I think catch teams off guard and get guys the ball in space and give them room to run. I think that correlates with efficiency, and I think with guys like Le'Veon and Jamison Crowder, I think that opens up a lot more room on the field for a guy like Robbie Anderson.
Yeah, protect the quarterback, and hopefully he can play some football. Any other receivers that you wanted to talk about?
The second guy I'm going to mention here is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. So I previously mentioned that the Steelers threw the ball more than anyone in our database, and probably ever. I'm going to assume that that's the case. The Packers actually dropped back to throw more than the Steelers did, but they got sacked nearly twice as much. So hopefully they protect Aaron Rodgers a little better this year. I think everyone benefits from that in that offense. But that represents the fact that they're throwing the ball a ton, and who's going to get it besides Devontae Adams, who I think is going to just blow up this year. He's already at that status, but I think he just continues to, maybe even ascend to number one wide receiver in the league. But I think number two on that list is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I put him right above Geronimo Allison. If I was taking a flyer on one of those guys, you can get them late, so it really is kind of that flyer type of a pick. A stat that I pulled that I thought was interesting was among the 100 most targeted wide receivers, only 3 ranked in the top 30 in terms of average depth of catch and yards after catch per reception. So guys that are catching the ball deep a lot and are able to run after the catch. Those 3 guys were Tyreek Hill, Josh Gordon, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Kind of an interesting group because the first 2 I mentioned are kind of in the eye of the league for disciplinary reasons, but we don't have to go into that. Good receivers in their own right, and you throw Marquez Valdes-Scantling's name on that list, and you start to dream on what he could be.
Yeah, I'm interested in Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I think, like you talk about, everybody expects Devontae Adams to get a ton, but then you kind of look around, like who's gonna get this other stuff? Because I think everybody thinks Aaron Rodgers is going to have a good year if he's healthy. We expect him to be better than he was last year, and he played pretty conservatively last year, barely turned the ball over at all. But we all think that a more aggressive system, a more imaginative system, maybe different things could be going on. I don't think we're expecting more exotic smash mouth type stuff out of this coaching staff. So looking at him, it's really interesting, and as a physical presence, he's a really interesting guy. There's a lot to be excited about. You talked about the high depth of the target and the yards after the catch. Both those things really nice. The thing that he needs to do, though, is catch the ball more often. He's got to get open. He's got to be where he's supposed to be. To have a 51% completion percentage between Aaron Rodgers and any receiver is really alarming. You just don't see that. You see Aaron Rodgers with almost every receiver that he has being up over 60%, if not higher. So it was an alarming thing there. And it's not always drops. There are ways that you have incompletions that it's not necessarily going to be charted as a drop. But wanting to just see more of an ability to get to the right spots and not having it to be something where Aaron is going to be throwing him open every time. And then, if you get open and you catch the ball in space, then I think somebody like this is really scary to do a lot of damage. So interesting player here, because if it goes well, you could see it going really well. And if it goes poorly, the floor is the floor. Like it is this anywhere from 0 to 100 with him.
Yeah, they have plenty of guys in the queue that if MVS fails in his opportunity, they'll just plug somebody else in. But if he starts to progress and with the tools that allowed him to be among that group that I mentioned, you could see big things coming from him. And that Green Bay offense, it's interesting. You've seen guys start out slow. Devontae Adams certainly had a slow start to his career and now has become what he is. Geronimo Allison, the first year in that offense, really struggled to the point where I didn't think he belonged on the field at all, to being at the point where he was a functional receiver last year. And I think he'll be on the field pretty much every down this year and contribute to that offense. But MVS really has that big time ability that I think if him and Aaron Rodgers get on the same page, he could do big things.
All right. Those are the value plays. Let's take a quick break to hear about the Football Outsiders Almanac, which is out and on bookstands now. And then we'll jump right back in to talk about some of the interesting rookies that Corey has to keep an eye on for your fantasy drafts.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast. Matt and Aaron will be back next week to discuss the Football Outsiders Almanac 2019. The Almanac includes comprehensive coverage of all 32 NFL teams, analysis of off-season personnel changes, over 500 Kubiak fantasy football projections, and breakdowns of the top 50 college football teams for 2019. With numerous statistical measures that go far beyond standard NFL stats, Football Outsiders Almanac 2019 gives NFL fans the kind of sabermetric-like statistical analysis that revolutionized the fans' understanding of baseball. You can purchase this year's Football Outsiders Almanac at Amazon or at footballoutsiders.com.
Coming right back in, Corey, we talked about some of the value plays. Now we need to hear who are some of the rookies that we need to keep an eye on this year. And I think we all know where you're going to start off at the top with this one. What can you tell us about the first overall draft pick and what you can expect from him this year?
Yeah, so we talked about value guys early on, and I'm going to talk about Kyler Murray right now. He has ascended to the point where he isn't considered a value anymore. He's being drafted as quarterback 9. I really just was looking for an opportunity to get on the mic and talk about Kyler Murray and all the things that I love about him. He can certainly meet and exceed that draft position. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he did, but when you're betting on guys, their first year in the league can be dicey. So if you're reaching for a rookie quarterback, it's not always the best strategy, but the skills that Murray brings to the table, if there's anyone that makes it a worthwhile endeavor, it's him. I was looking back last year, and there weren't any rookie quarterbacks taken in the top 25. That was as far down as I could see in the draft order. So for a rookie quarterback to be going as the 9th at the position, that is a lot, but he is an incredible player.
So we can look, and the stats, when you look at Baker Mayfield's last season at Oklahoma, Kyler Murray's stats in his last season at Oklahoma, they're both really, really ridiculously good and far away from usual quarterback stats that we see. Now, part of that goes back to the conversation about your usage in college and how that can be affected and the offense that they're a part of in Oklahoma, which is one aspect of it. Obviously, Baker's shown that he could continue that performance to the NFL, although it's not like he was a QB1 in fantasy last year. Towards the end of the season, he came on 27 touchdown passes, set the rookie mark, but he wasn't in the top quarterback discussion over the course of the year. The difference is what we were talking about before about opportunity. And what we might see from Kyler Murray is just a different level of opportunity than we've been accustomed to from quarterbacks, period, let alone rookie quarterbacks or any other kind of quarterback. Coming back to Cliff Kingsbury and what we expect him to be doing on offense there.
Yeah, it's easy to bring up Baker Mayfield when you're having a conversation about Kyler Murray. I would have been interested to see where he would get drafted if he had gone into the season as the foregone conclusion starting quarterback. Probably somewhere around quarterback 15 would be my guess. But I think the success that he had as a rookie coming out of that Oklahoma offense gives people the confidence to take that risk on Kyler Murray. The two of those guys, their numbers at Oklahoma were comparable in the passing game. Both just tremendous efficiency through the air, willingness to throw the ball downfield, and with accuracy. Both had that in spades. I loved Baker Mayfield specifically for the intangibles that he brought. His demeanor, he just seems like a smart guy in the huddle and is unwilling to lose. You hope that Kyler Murray brings the same intangibles to the table. I think there's obviously a lot to like with him. Last year led the nation in passing yards per attempt and rushing yards per attempt from a quarterback, while also he had the highest rate of percentage of attempts downfield and the highest accuracy rate downfield, which is just ridiculous when you combine all these things. That offense, what you mentioned, Cliff Kingsbury, opens up a lot of doors that they're going to be playing at a high pace. Last year, it's going to be basically a 360 or a 180, whichever one of those is the right metaphor here for that offense. They're going to be going up and down the field quick. And I think Kyler Murray and the weapons that they brought in are going to benefit from that. I've said this before. I think that quarterbacks who have a legitimate running tool. So for that, my criteria is they don't fall back on running. It's a legitimate threat that they could run the ball at any opportunity. Anybody who has that tool that we've ever seen in the league, I think Kyler Murray could have the best arm. I've seen him make throws way down the field, completely on the money, and I think he'll continue to do that at the next level.
I like the thoughts there. I think it's another one that high risk, high reward, because if this offense is what you think it's going to be, then he could be throwing the ball all over the place. If this is something different, if something doesn't work out and the Cliff Kingsbury experience isn't exactly what we expect, it ends up being more pro style, it ends up not working out, there's injuries, whatever else happens, then this probably falls flat on its face unless it's just, unless his talent is that transcendent right off the bat, which seems like a tough sell. I'm curious, just quickly here. We talked a little bit about Baker Mayfield. Now with him being the starting quarterback, having a year under his belt, how high up does he go in the quarterback rankings this year? I've heard him talked about as a popular MVP bet. Is he a high draft pick fantasy player?
From what I've seen, Baker is on the top 5 borderline there. So like the 5, 6, 7 range among quarterbacks. You mentioned him in the MVP discussion. I like him as a value play. This is kind of going off into a different topic, into the betting realm, but I like Baker Mayfield as an MVP bet, Deshaun Watson as an MVP bet, Kyler Murray, you could throw, his name into the discussion. If all the pieces fall into place, we talked about that transcendent ability. If he can lead a team that was absolutely dreadful last year to the playoffs and puts up incredible numbers, you could definitely see his name being in the mix for that.
That'd be a shock to me. I'll say that the rookie quarterback MVP. I could see the scenario you're painting. I hope you're getting 100-1 odds or something.
Oh yeah, the odds are up there. That's why I mention it. Him as the rookie of the year, I saw he's plus 250. So that's a good bet for me. If he stays healthy, I think he's the rookie of the year.
It makes sense. You'd almost think in certain ways it'd be hard not to if he gets the type of opportunity that we expect him to. Let's talk about one of his teammates, Andy Isabella, another rookie who's going to be coming out to Arizona with him. What do you want to tell us about Andy Isabella?
Andy Isabella was an exciting player for us here at SIS. We come out, or for the first time this year, came out with the SIS Football Rookie Handbook. And he was near the top of the board for wide receivers. So that was made up of pure football scouting report based on the guys who'd seen Andy Isabella play and the data that we collected on him. So combining those two things, he ended up being near the top of that board. And I certainly don't disagree with that. And I'm really excited about where he landed and the quarterback and the offense that he landed with. He interests me. He's pretty versatile in terms of where I think he can line up on the field. We talk about him here as being a slot receiver that wins vertically, which is not your traditional slot receiver skill set. So I think that's something that as the league continues to evolve, we may see more of. They'll probably run plenty of 4 wide receiver sets. They have Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald, who will almost certainly play in the slot. Hakeem Butler will probably get a bunch of snaps out wide. So I could see Isabella and Fitzgerald playing a lot in the slot. Fitzgerald more as your underneath guy. Isabella more as a versatile guy, getting looks downfield and opening up the offense through the seams. Something that I saw is that slot receivers on throws downfield are the yards per attempt. There's more efficiency when you're throwing to a slot receiver downfield than a wide receiver downfield. 10 plus air yards downfield, those throws, you have 1.3, I think the number was, more yards per attempt when you're throwing to a slot receiver. And if you're throwing 20 plus yards down the field, you're looking at basically 3 more yards per attempt when you're throwing to a slot receiver. So in a league that's hungry for efficiency, I think that's something that could get uncovered, and we could see more throws to slot receivers down the field. Isabella's got the skill set to do that.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting player. I see why he gets a lot of that love, and I think he's pretty ready-made to kind of go in there and play with the way that he plays football. He can read on the run. I think he's a slot guy. He's going to play in the slot, like you said, and having some of that vertical element in that offense that's going to be in that 10 personnel 4 wide a lot of the time. I think that'll be a really nice fit. And for all the talking up of the Arizona Cardinals, I'm nervous about their offensive line. It's been thrown together a little bit on the fly. It was really bad last year. Worth mentioning, we should at least keep an eye on that one because that's always something that can do an offense in. I feel almost nervous, kind of giving love to the system, and we're talking about the opportunity that might come there, which is a big part of it. But also, part of that, I think, if you're kind of built on a house of crappy offensive line, then things can collapse pretty easily.
Yeah, we saw that with Josh Rosen last year. He was running for his life most of the time, and he could never get in a rhythm. So it'll be interesting to see how he does in Miami. Not the best offense to go to try and rejuvenate yourself, but to get out from behind that offensive line where he struggled mightily. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he could never get comfortable behind that offensive line.
Did he find the one worst offensive line in the league? It's got to be pretty close there. I don't know, especially losing Juwan Wayne. When you lose Juwan James and you're like upset about that, then your offensive line's got problems.
Yeah, not a huge upgrade there.
Let's look at one more wide receiver that you wanted to talk about, another rookie wide receiver. Who do you got there?
The name that I'm bringing here is Paris Campbell. So this is a guy who's going so late in drafts that you can almost not draft him and add him. But if you want to, fill out your roster and grab him at the end of the draft, possibly last round, it's Paris Campbell. And he got drafted by the Colts. He plays almost strictly slot receiver. The Colts threw their slot receiver more than anyone last year. And Paris Campbell was targeted 96 times from the slot last year, just 16 times from other alignments. And he did see a little bit of work in the backfield. So he's the type of a versatile gadget player that isn't traditionally, doesn't traditionally translate to fantasy value, at least consistently on a weekly basis. But if this guy starts to flash and they want to get the ball in his hands, he shows that he can, make plays. I think he's going to establish a role. May not be right out of the gate, but that's a smart offense that they have there in Indianapolis, and I like what they're doing. And if he's making plays for them, they're going to keep giving him the opportunity.
He's a fun guy to watch play. I love the idea of betting on that Colts offense, Andrew Luck, and the offensive line that they've built, that kind of infrastructure. T.Y. is going to get his, but also T.Y. is going to get some focus from the defense. And we've talked before about them adding Devin Funchess to play in the slot. You could see some of a lot of these kind of tight sets that I think became really popular last year. It wouldn't be shocking to me at all to see Indianapolis start to make more use of that with a whole bunch of guys lined up in those sort of nasty splits, creating difficulties for the defense.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. The Rams were really effective with that last year. So there's probably it's a copycat league. If a team is really effective with something, the smarter teams around the league will pick up on that and probably make some adjustments to be more effective.
And then also just the kind of the basketball team element. Mike Lombardi, my old boss, used to always talk about you want your receiver group to look like a basketball team. You want to have your center, you want to have your wings, and you want to have your little guys, your guards that can get in and out and do stuff like that. You see them building their group up together there. You see how all these guys are going to fit together, bring in the different roles as opposed to kind of having these duplicate skill sets and not having an answer against certain defenses as a result. Awesome stuff.
Yeah, so one more thing to add there. You mentioned a versatile personnel group on your team. I think the wide receiver group in Indy, they were hungry for a guy like Paris Campbell. They threw a lot of screens last year, but they didn't do it effectively. They were near the bottom of the league in terms of yards per catch on a screen pass. And Paris Campbell, they went out and got Paris Campbell, who led the nation last year in yards per catch on screen passes, 13.3 yards per screen catch, which was well above anybody else.
I think you buried the lead, man. That's awesome. So we're talking about the team that ran more screens than anybody. So high volume of screens, high opportunity for screens, and we're talking about the best college receiver at running screens when he was given the opportunity. That sounds like that could be a really nice recipe there for the Colts.
Yeah, 38 wide receiver screens over the last 2 years for Campbell, 13.3 yards per target. The Colts were running those to Chester Rogers last year, so I think Paris Campbell will represent a bit of an upgrade there.
I got to ask you, where did you do that research that you could just find so easily, these college receivers and NFL receivers, their stats on screen passes specifically?
Yeah, that's the SIS Data Hub. There is so much that you can do on the Data Hub, and if you spend time on it like I do, you can really start to – there are no limits.
It amazes me, because it's easy to use, but also with your expertise – the amount of stuff that you can do, the human researcher that you are now, that you become doing stuff, it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm not a skilled coder or data scientist, data analyst. That's not my background. And I see people here, whether it's in the IT department or the R&D department, who write these bulky codes on SQL that I could just never replicate. These guys are so good that it's almost discouraging for me. Good for them, but that's just not the kind of expertise that I have. But the Data Hub makes it so easy for someone like me to work with data and find out this kind of information with a few clicks of a button.
All right, let's talk last up, the rookie running backs. What can you tell us about that group?
The rookie running backs coming into the league, they weren't getting a ton of love as a position group coming into the draft, but we talked about running backs and opportunity being key. I happen to like a lot of the guys that are coming into the league this year. So I'm going to rattle off a bunch of guys, and I'll talk about each of them, but it almost ends up being a comprehensive list of the rookie running backs. These guys landed in good opportunities. So Josh Jacobs was the first running back off the board. Funny enough, I've actually seen Josh Jacobs in person twice in the last few months. You and I ran into him at the airport after the combine, and then I was at the FSGA conference, the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Conference, a few weeks ago, and who was there but Josh Jacobs. They brought him in on a panel with Matthew Berry, and it was very entertaining. They were talking to him a lot about random things, but also what he expects, how the transition to the league's been going. One of the things that he said was that he is going to be used in all facets of the offense, even mentioned throwing the ball. So I think that offense is going to be built around him, and they brought in Antonio Brown. That offense they could see interesting things from that offense. Josh Jacobs, excelled in the pass game at Alabama, but I could see him easily exceeding 75 targets and being among the most targeted running backs in the league.
I could see that too. And I also think something figures into it of they drafted him there. They don't want to look dumb. They're going to give him the ball. If he's healthy, it's hard to imagine a scenario where they decide, oh, no, we were wrong. We don't really like him. It's like the Giants with Saquon last year. He was going to get the ball. I think Josh Jacobs is going to get the ball this year. And like you mentioned, he's got talent in the passing game that he can be on the field all three downs.
Yeah, a lot of running back opportunity comes. It relates to where they were drafted. Teams want to look smart, like you said. So if they spend a high draft pick on a running back, they're going to give him every opportunity to succeed, and that opportunity is what creates fantasy value. Another guy who kind of fits that mold a little bit is Miles Sanders, who went to the Eagles. They don't traditionally draft running backs early, and they don't traditionally have a bell cow in their offense. But Miles Sanders grabbed him from in-state. He was at Penn State last year. Comparing his numbers to Saquon Barkley's in their final year at Penn State, they weren't that far off. Miles Sanders is a good player, and they spent that high draft pick on him. I think they're going to give him every opportunity to earn that feature role in the offense. Let's just hope he gets healthy and can work through camp and get some preseason action.
Yeah, Aaron and I actually discussed this one because we were talking about the workload breakdowns for the Eagles, and I think both of us agreed that probably earlier in the year that he'd be a little bit less relied on. But I think if the season goes the way they'd like, by the end of the year, he's their main guy. I still think there'll be some split with them, and they were 20th in the NFL in carries last year overall, the Eagles. So I don't think them being as a team that really is in a hurry to get to the run, especially being the Wentz team and not the Foles team. But not a bad spot there because, like you said, he's a guy, dynamic running back, really good talent, can play both phases, and I think that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think that team has a ton of weapons on offense, like you alluded to. I think that the Eagles have probably been frustrated with some of the running back play that they've seen lately. Jay Ajayi got hurt, and they just couldn't find that good option to fill in last year. If Miles Sanders starts to show that he's that guy, I think they'll let him run with the feature role in that offense, and that will be a lot of pass catching too.
All right. Any other rookie guys that you wanted to talk about?
I mean, a lot of them are really good and coming into good opportunity. David Montgomery in Chicago. He's a little risky at his ADP, his draft stock right now. He's being drafted as the 21st running back off the board. It still stands to be seen what his role is going to be. They brought in Mike Davis, who did a nice job in Seattle. They have Tariq Cohen, who has that pass-catching role. I could see him winning that Jordan Howard role, but I think he's more versatile than he gets credit for. I've seen him with my own eyes catch passes and do good things in the passing game. So I think if he earns that role, he'll cash in on that draft stock. Speaking of cashing in, I think Darrell Henderson is the ultimate lottery ticket of fantasy drafts this year. If Todd Gurley's hurt and Henderson gets that starting role, he has massive explosiveness, and the Rams are near the top of the league in terms of seeing the fewest stacked boxes, so he'll have room to run. He had more than twice or twice as many 40-plus yard touchdowns compared to anybody else in college football last year. So give this guy space and he'll take off. Even wasn't playing the toughest schedule at Memphis, but with the data hub, I was able to look at his stats versus tough competition and easy competition, Power 5 schools, and weeding out the easy matchups that he saw. Yeah, the yards per attempt went down a little bit as expected, but he was still putting up big numbers against tough defenses.
It's hard to maintain 10 yards per attempt against every team that you face.
Yeah, he did it 2 years in a row at Memphis. I think he had the same exact yards per carry 2 years in a row, and it was over 10.
Something like that, really high up there. He'll be going to the Rams, like you said, with the Todd Gurley questions. They were number 2 in the NFL in rushing touchdowns last year with 23. So if the offense is functioning similarly to that, and I think as we speculated about maybe even some more 12 personnel coming out of the Rams this year rather than staying in that 11, which I think we'll see plenty of for sure, could be interesting. And he really excelled on the outside zone, and we know that the Rams are all about that outside zone. So it seems like a ready-made fit there. A lot of it will be dependent on Gurley and just how healthy he is or isn't and how much they want to ride him.
Exactly. If Gurley's healthy and functioning at his full peak performance, Darrell Henderson doesn't have week-to-week value. It takes an injury there in a situation and a spot to open up for him in that offense. And if it does, look out because he's got the ability, and that's a good offense to be running in.
Any other rookie running backs?
I'll rattle off a couple of guys that I like in some quick breakdowns. Damian Harris, we could look back and see that he ended up starting the majority of the games at running back in New England with the Sony Michel situation there, kind of an uncertainty there. Damian Harris getting drafted at RB 50. He had a very similar rushing output to Josh Jacobs on the ground at Alabama. Jacobs outshined him in the passing game, but James White has that role locked up in New England anyway. So I could see Damian Harris making some hay on the ground in New England.
Similar to Montgomery in certain ways there. I don't think they're necessarily similar players, but I think that they have a better chance of getting that first and second down role than, competing with the James White or the Tariq Cohens of the world.
Right, yeah. Sony Michel was able to do a lot with that role last year. And if that role comes to Damian Harris, I can see him with similar output. A couple other guys I'll just mention quickly. Justice Hill. He was one of my favorite backs to watch during his career at Oklahoma. Great at making defenders miss in the open field. So a thing I started to do was keep names of players that impressed me when I was watching them in my phone just to look out for them in the future. And Justice Hill, I think it was his freshman year at Oklahoma State. He was playing ahead of Chris Carson at Oklahoma State early in his career, and saw him play a few times and just blew me away. So he was the initial guy that got me to write a name in my phone. And then from there, I kept doing it. So if he gets an opportunity in Baltimore, look out for that. They're going to be running a ton, so he could even see the field even as a running back 2 or 3 on their depth chart. But if he rises up the ranks there, he's got a lot of skills to like. Devin Singletary is in Buffalo. They have an older group of running backs. Possible injury situations there, who knows? But Devin Singletary led the nation in broken tackle rate last year and produced the highest broken tackle rate that we've seen during our 3 years of charting college football. He beat out Kareem Hunt in 2017 and Darius Geis from 2016 to post the highest broken tackle rate last year at Florida Atlantic. The last guy I'll mention, no fantasy value out of the gate, but is Divine Ozigbo, who got picked up when undrafted, which, to my surprise, got picked up by New Orleans. And we know that offense creates opportunity for guys that are on the field. So if a few injuries were to happen there and Divine Ozigbo takes a starting running back role in that offense, that's going to be a guy to keep an eye out for on the waiver wire and spend that waiver cash on during the season if he gets a role. He averaged the most yards per touch among FBS backs in the draft class this year. So the guy's got talent.
One guy I wanted to just throw out there, Rodney Anderson, who got drafted late by the Bengals, a guy that we saw in that Oklahoma offense 2 years ago, then got injured and was out for most of the season, came out early and ended up going in the 6th round, for the Bengals. He's an interesting guy to keep an eye on, a guy with speed, a guy that can play in the passing game, like we've talked about. Like you mentioned, guys that really no value, but keep an eye on them, maybe, stash them away if you have the bench room, because they could find a role later in the year.
Yeah, if you're playing in really deep leagues or a dynasty league, Rodney Anderson's a guy to keep an eye on. He's a little bit buried on that depth chart right out of the gate. I think if we saw him stay healthy more in college and he was able to produce more at the same rate that he did in extremely limited touches, then he would have gone much higher and would be getting opportunity right out of the gate. But if it comes to him, that's another guy to keep a close eye on.
That will do it for our fantasy breakdown with Corey March. Anything else you want to say before we sign off and get out of here?
No, I'm good, Matt. Thanks for having me. It was fun. Maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Yep. We'll definitely have to have you come back with Aaron and I throughout the year to talk about some of the different fantasy storylines as they're going on and get all of your input. On that note, we will sign off. As always, please subscribe, rate, and review. We appreciate all of your support, and you can let us know on Twitter how you think we're doing at sportsinfo_SIS and at FB Outsiders. As we mentioned before, go check out the Football Outsiders Almanac. It is out now. You can order it on Amazon.com. It is one of my favorite things to read every year, and we will be back next week. I will be grilling Aaron with all of my toughest questions from my first pass-through of the Almanac for 2019. I'm excited for it, and we're excited to be back next week. Have a great weekend.